My name is Patrick Terry, and I'm the President and CEO for the Columbus Council on World Affairs. We'd like to welcome you to this program. Much better. You look much nicer. This is quite a week for a STEM program with all that was going on yesterday, so much so that one of our panelists was losing his voice because he runs COSI and all the work that they were doing around the community to help people understand and experience the eclipse in a safe way. We hope that everyone was safe as they looked at the eclipse and followed doctor's orders. But let me introduce one of our most important partners who also happens to do a lot in STEM and is one of the leaders in this community from Battelle. Please join me in welcoming Amy Kennedy, the Senior Vice President for Education and Philanthropy at Battelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Patrick, for that warm welcome. It's my pleasure to be here today, not only because it's about STEM and not only because we have two great folks who are going to share their wisdom, but it's exciting to be here at the Past Innovation Lab. Battelle's a sponsor. I do encourage you to take a tour. You might even get to talk to some students if the timing works out okay. So it's like 2 for 1 today: lunch, conversation, and a tour. I'm really honored to introduce our speakers for today, Dr. Frederick Bertley and Miss Elaine Larson. Dr. Frederick Bertley, who I know really well because I have the honor of being on the board at COSI, is a tremendous asset to our community and the COSI organization. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of COSI in Columbus, and he began his work there in January of 2017. In his role as President, Dr. Bertley imagines COSI as the epicenter for all things scientific for the Columbus community, and I would say that was never more apparent than yesterday. If you've not seen the footage of Frederick on the news talking about the eclipse, you need to check it out. But I think more importantly is the commitment that our organization at COSI has been able to show under his leadership to be engaged with our community. And so Frederick did a great job partnering with the libraries in town and having kids visit libraries, get some glasses, learn about science, and watch the eclipse. Before he joined us at COSI, Dr. Bertley was the Senior Vice President for Science and Education with the renowned Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. There he directed a diverse portfolio of visionary initiatives supporting innovation in STEM learning and science communication, as well as departments and programs that capture the history and legacy of the Franklin Institute, including the prestigious Benjamin Franklin Awards program. A native Canadian, Frederick received his PhD in immunology and a Bachelor of Science in physiology and mathematics, all from McGill University. He really is a STEM professional. He has received many honors and has lectured on a variety of science and education topics at universities, colleges, cultural institutions, and government agencies throughout the world. Frederick has keynoted and been an invited speaker at the United Nations, the White House, the National Academy of Sciences, and distinguished institutions around the world. So Frederick has a lot to share today, but he will be sharing the stage with Elaine Larson, who also has a lot to share about STEM education and about her work. Elaine is currently the Director of Education Grants for the National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C., where she previously worked in instructional design. As Director of Education Grants at National Geographic, Elaine oversees a program that provides grants to a broad range of educators working in education situations that range from traditional K-12 to adult education in both domestic and international settings. Elaine continues to build the National Geographic Learning Framework, which communicates the Society's values around teaching and learning to internal resource developers and to its many external audiences. Elaine's career experiences have focused largely on the development of instructional resources for K-12 students and teachers, as well as adult education and teacher professional development. Elaine has a master's degree in education administration / adult and higher education and a bachelor's degree in English education and history. Little known fact, Elaine, I also have a bachelor's degree in English education and used to be an English teacher. Prior to joining the National Geographic Society, Elaine worked in public broadcasting, directing the provision of services to schools in a statewide market and overseeing programming and production of instructional media. Elaine's work has included classroom teaching, website development, preparation of digital content for online delivery, marketing, writing, and research. So we have quite a conversation ahead of us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Frederick Bertley and Elaine Larson to the stage.
Panelists, are you ready?
We are ready.
Great. I wanted to just start with how you got into this work.
First of all, Patrick, on behalf of yourself and the council, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. And thank you all for coming and sharing your time at lunch. Real quick, roughly a minute, 2 minutes here on the back end? 1 minute? All right. So in 1 minute, and some of you might have heard this before, but I have one of those funny stories where as a 9-year-old, I had a paper route, and my parents, even though it was my paper route, the money I had to put in the bank, I couldn't spend it on what I want, but I really wanted to buy this video game. I'm a 70s and 80s kid, so we're going way back to those old Coleco handheld video games. And I begged my parents, they finally let me buy this one video game, but it took those 9-volt, those square batteries at the back, and I would play the game, but you'd get 45 minutes of fun, maybe an hour, and the battery would die. And it was, as a 9-year-old, it was a huge frustration, right? And so I had this, what I thought was an ingenious idea. I went downstairs in the basement, found an old lamp that my dad had, cut off the cable, opened the back of the video game. You know you have that red and black wire, right? Everybody's nodding their head. You're like, oh, here he goes. Yeah. So I attached the red and black wire to the end of the lamp cable, plugged the lamp cable in the wall. Best 10 seconds of my life. I was playing and I'm thinking, oh, this is, and I remember like it's yesterday, Patrick. I was playing the game thinking, I'm gonna play this before school, I'm gonna play it after school, I can play the game all the time I want. And by the 11th second, poof, the game exploded. It was charred by the outlet. My dad, who's from Trinidad and Tobago, runs downstairs and says, son, what are you trying to do? You're trying to burn down the house. And I'm like, no, Dad, no. But the point of the story was, I realized that this thing called electricity, that as a 9-year-old, and I took for granted that you flick on a switch and you get the light, or you plug something in and you can use something electronic, was way more complicated than just that light switch or outlet. That there was something magical happening behind that wall, and as a 9-year-old, I had no idea what it was, but I was so curious and I was hooked on that forever, and that's what got me excited about science and technology and engineering.
But Elaine, if you could talk a little bit more, like, and we'll get to your credentials around STEM, but because that may be
video game playing. Yeah.
That's exactly. But I'd like to hear how you got into this line of work.
Well, how as English teacher. Okay, so how did I get into STEM? I slid into STEM, basically. Actually, I have a childhood story about science. Well, I grew up on a farm, and I spent like my life outside. Okay, I was hardly ever in the house. But my favorite thing was in the tree strip, finding all of the bugs that I could find. I just, under every rock, under the bark of trees. Remember that, when you would just lift that bark off and it would come right off and there'd be all these wonderful bugs underneath. That was really interesting, but I think it peaked when I was about 8, and maybe this was the end of it until adulthood. What I wanted more than the dollhouse, that was big, but bigger than that was the chemistry set. I had to have one of these chemistry sets, and can you believe they came with real chemicals? Do you remember those? They had little jars of real chemicals. I made some horrible things because I didn't, there was instructions, but who uses that? So you just put them all together and you heat them up. And I mean, it's wonderful. And then I decided I wasn't going to be a chemist. So anyway, in my professional career, how I sort of started as a teacher, and I started a liberal arts major. And as I was working through my career, which has been really, it's gone this way and that way. It's whenever something interested me, bright, shiny thing over here, oh, I'll do that. A little more targeted than that, but not much. And I started working on instructional design and developing resources for educators, primarily to access online. All sorts of resources, from video to lesson plans to interactives and games. And keep coming back to working on STEM-related resources. And so a lot of my career, especially the last 5-10 years, has been working on STEM-related resources. I did not know about nanotechnology, and I realized how much it intrigues me, and it really is something I'm really interested in. And now I've come here, and I've decided to move to Columbus so that I can hang out here at the Innovation Lab. It's awesome. Thank you.
Great. Well, welcome to Columbus, the newest resident. We can give you all tips on great places to eat and places to live. But I love these stories because I think what it shows, sometimes we think about STEM and it sounds so technical and sterile and linear and scientific, and there isn't a lot of like emotion and excitement. And I just saw that in two people's stories and curiosity. And while I wouldn't advise students at home to do any of the things described by these distinguished panelists, I would encourage students at home and adults alike to follow their curiosities. Can you, and particularly Elaine, because we know a lot about COSI, I was going to ask Elaine to tell me more about, so National Geographic. I mean, I think
Nobody knows anything about it.
Nobody knows anything about it except those magazines. How many people here read magazines, like the printed? You know how they're printed now, or they were? Yeah, they were all over the house in stacks. And but help us understand, what is National Geographic today?
What we are, I was saying last night, the first question I get when I'm on a plane or something and someone finds out where I work, there are two of them. The first one is, do you travel all the time? And it's no. And then secondly is, I have a garage full of all of the magazines from ever. Do you want them? So before you think to ask me that, no, we don't want them. We have them. So anyway, what is National Geographic? It's what we've always been for 130 years. There have been changes in how we're organized and what we look like, maybe on the surface, but underneath it's the same old, which is out there exploring the world, looking at science, looking at archaeology, looking at what's happening with the environment, looking at basically the mission of maintaining and cultivating inquiry and a sustainable planet, which is a big goal, but it's one that we take very seriously. In education, we've had an education department at National Geographic for about 30 years, and with a focus on geography, but looking at geography in a very holistic way, realizing that everything, every problem, every solution involves geography in some way. And so we're looking at a new strategy, a new way of presenting our materials to people in an active, experiential, problem-solving geography inquiry sort of way. So, and then I just have to say that they talk about what I do with grants, and it's exciting. For 129 years, National Geographic has given grants to scientists and explorers and people out there doing all sorts of incredible things. And this year, we started giving grants to educators. And when my boss said, when we did some reorganization, what would you like to do? And I said, this is it. I really want to do this because we have so many people out there who could do really remarkable things. They had a little bit of support. So for those are there school administrators in the room? A few? Anybody know anyone in a school? Okay, thank you. We give grants to teachers, so, and other educators, but yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but.
That's excellent, thank you. I know the framework that Elaine mentioned, there's handouts on the way out at the registration table that describe National Geographic's education strategy, which just happens to be in the acronym ASK, Attitude, Skills, Knowledge, kind of as the core fundamentals of that framework. Frederick, you've been in science-related activity almost your whole life. It's so calming. God, if only I could get an app that does that, like before I go to bed, that would just really, really be nice. It's as good as my kid's voice. Can you just kind of help us who aren't like in this all the time? Like, what are some of the trends you're seeing in in STEM or STEM education that you think are worth non-STEM people knowing about?
Sure, so great question. And before I get into this, I really want to, as many of you already do, I want to add the A into STEM and really talk about STEAM. Because far too long this nation and many places around the world, in fact, disassociate science and engineering with the arts and humanities. And that's a massive problem. They're connected, right? I mean, talk about the left brain, right brain. I bet you none of you have seen someone walking down the street with just one side of their head, right? We have both sides of the brain. You may like science more, or you may like arts, but we use all our brain all the time, and really integrating arts and humanities as part of this whole STEM enterprise is important. Why am I so passionate about STEM? So, first off, and let me ask a couple questions. How many of you have texted today? Show of hands. All right. How many of you, when you drive in your car, use GPS? All right. How many of y'all eat food? Right? With the exception of the food in this garden today. The bulk of the food you eat, unless you shop religiously at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, is genetically modified. Right? When you get in your car, you're using GPS. You know, you're texting. You wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is either check to see what our great president tweeted, or you check your emails. But the point is you grab this technical device. We cannot get throughout the day, ladies and gentlemen, without specifically being dependent on something scientific or something engineered. You can't do it in the 21st century. If you think it's not true, see if you can wake up tomorrow, Wednesday morning, and get throughout the day without specifically and directly being impacted by science, technology, engineering, and math. You can't do it. So that's one, why it's really important. The second reason why it's really important is we live in a growing science illiterate society. I mean, we're talking about world affairs and cross national borders, and you've all heard the data. Kids in Suriname, kids in Finland are outpacing American students on science and math exams, et cetera, et cetera. We all know the data. But it's more profound than that. A bunch of organizations, including the National Science Foundation, have really polled American science literacy. And here's just 4 points of data I want to share with you. Nobody in this room, and it's really funny how Eclipse was yesterday, so thanks for talking about that. 1/4, 25% of all Americans, 1/4 of all of us, still think that the sun revolves around the earth. That's where you guys go, ooh. No, this is true, right? Can you imagine that? Right? All right, if you're not impressed by that, you talked about climate change. Right? We're a little better there. 69%, almost 70% of Americans think climate change is a thing, but half of those people that actually recognize it's a thing don't think we have to worry about it. That doesn't impress you? Okay. You've all gone to the doctor. Some of you in this room have gone to the doctor. The doctor, someone who went to medical school, has said, oh, I think you have a viral infection, Frederick, blah, 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 right? We've had this. And what do? They write you a prescription for an antibiotic. There you go. What do? We all do the same thing. We go to the pharmacy, we hand in the scribble we can't read, we get the antibiotics, we take the 3 pills a day. Imagine that. A medical doctor is giving you an antibiotic for something they think that you have is a viral infection. Now, to be completely clear here, antibiotics are 100% useless, ineffective, have no functionality on viruses, right? But there's a science literacy there that even permeates people who go to medical school, right? And we're opening up dinosaurs, which is going to be a great new exhibit at COSI come November. It's a partnership with the American Museum of Natural History. One really fun thing there is 40 to 42% of Americans think dinosaurs and humans cohabited. They didn't. We were not running away from dinosaurs. They were not chasing us to eat us. Whole bunch of different eons of time in between. And so I say this because my goal and COSI's goal or scientists' goal isn't to make all of us PhD pharmacologists or PhD scientists. That's not the goal. But there needs to be a value attached with some science literacy, right? So that the massive antibiotic-resistant drugs we have that are killing people in our American hospitals, you have hundreds of thousands of people that are dying every year because they caught a bug when they went to a hospital for something else because the antibiotics don't work anymore because of the misprescription. And the last thing I want to say is if you grow up in this great country, you absolutely take pride in learning to read, right? No one wants to be illiterate. You're supposed to read and write. You're also supposed to know to count, do your times tables, right? But for some reason, it's okay to be completely science illiterate, and that needs to change. And so that's why I'm passionate.
Appreciate that. Thank you for showing how holistic it is. And we often say at the council, we also think global literacy is also just as important. And we call it G-STEAM. I don't know if that's catchy enough, but G-STEAM or STEAM might be the next, maybe we work on that. But Elaine, is there anything you'd want to add to sort of how National Geographic sees trends in the work that you do, STEM, kind of, or more broadly science? Are you seeing any that you'd want to comment on?
I think some of the trends that we're seeing in things that we're pursuing, we're seeing more people working across what you might have thought of as disciplines. And I'm thinking particularly of the folks that we're giving grants to right now, not necessarily in education, but we have, they are educators, but they are artists who are working in climate issues. They are archaeologists who are working in sustainability issues and the economic sustainability of the communities that they're doing their archaeological work. I see that more and more and more, and it's across the world. It's here in the United States, but it's certainly happening internationally as well. We just gave a grant. Our very first education grant was to a county extension agent in Garden City, Kansas. And she is doing a project where she is providing STEM education to refugee girls, but it's an intergenerational sort of activity. So they're taking STEM classes, but they're working with parents, they're working with community members. And there's a huge refugee population, a large for Garden City, in Garden City, relocated refugees. So she's combining what she knows about STEM, happens to know about agriculture, about other things related to being a county extension agent, but also she's working on community building. And she's working on bringing these people into the community and using STEM classes to do it. So I think it's just, we're just seeing more cross-discipline work in STEM, and I think it's because people realize that STEM is not those 4 letters. It is across the board. And when people are, when young people are excelling in STEM, or when they're learning STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, all of those areas, they're gaining other skills as well. And I'll refer to here again when we talk about active learning, which is another trend that I'm seeing. It's been called many things over the years, experiential learning, it's been called problem-based learning, but the main idea is that kids are actually working on problems. And again, it's not new. It's been around for a long time, but I'm seeing a real resurgence of it in the schools and the teachers that we're working with. And it's really real problem solving in the communities, in science, in technology, where kids are actually building things. What you see going on here, they're actually contributing to things. Leads to one of my pet peeves when people talk about we're preparing these kids, these young kids, to someday be the problem solvers of the world. And I'm saying, look around. They are the problem solvers now. They're the ones who are coming up with solutions to problems, and we're seeing that more and more. So, I think those are just some of the areas. Some of the trends that I'm hoping we see in STEM education itself. I'm really hoping that we see more of a push into STEM education for early childhood, because it's there. I mean, you see them playing. They're playing outside. They're the kids with the chemistry sets, but there's not a lot of policy around that in education. So that's my push, is for starting earlier. I'll stop for now.
We get to see students doing it right. I know I see them in here and some back here, solving the world's problems, one step at a time. Let's transition and start overlaying the global perspectives, culture. You mentioned the project with the refugees. So does it matter if STEM experts, STEM professionals have a global mindset, have cross-cultural competence, understand the world we live in, the dynamics of people? Elaine, do you want to start?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. You get more time.
Okay.
Go ahead and
Okay.
take some
I
more
know
time.
he wants us to keep it short. I can't imagine not answering that question yes, though, and that's why I answered it that way, because I don't think you can, just like you can't get through the day without running into things that have been produced or that are part of our world that are STEM related, STEM focused. I don't think you can go through a day in our work lives or our private lives where we aren't impacted by global issues. And I think people realize that more and more, that we are not isolated, we cannot be isolated. And that the skills that kids are learning in STEM-related education, when they start jobs in STEM-related careers, these are going to be global. They're going to be global issues. We cannot do this by ourselves. Things are not sourced, everything from the United States, for one thing. My nephew works for Best Buy, and he works in supply chain management. I had no idea what that was until about 2 years ago. It's like, and then when I think about it, it's like, oh, of course. And they're into sustainability in their supply chain management. And it's really interesting when you realize how reliant they are on, not global sources, of course they are, but understanding the differences, understanding sustainability in that whole workplace. So I think yes, and I could give you a lot of examples, but you have more.
Yes. I mean, it's a great question, but as Elaine said, it's really an obvious question, and it's an old question. We all know that. All you in the room are already convinced that absolutely having a global mindset is as important as having an open mindset when you talk about kind of learning, being open to things. Without a question. I mean, the world today is more than ever interconnected. And you were giving some stats early, Patrick, in your talk, but you talked about how many engineers are coming out of India and China, and those numbers are true. But let's face it, folks, the United States is roughly 350 million people. India now has 1.3 billion, and China has 1.37 billion. So just on a mathematical, statistical probability, they're crunching out way more scientists, way more engineers, by the way, way more artists as well, and way more people studying humanity. They just have threefold, almost fourfold our population. And so with that, a lot of the products that are being developed in science and technology are also coming out from foreign countries. And so we really need to be close to that. But I also want to talk about what's happening today. I mean, you turn on the television, and yeah, we have a lot of domestic issues here. We're worrying about some interesting times, to be sure. But when you think about the major things that this country is preoccupied with, North Korea, that's outside our borders. China, that's outside our borders. Russia, what's happening there. Yesterday, we heard an unbelievable, dynamic plan for Afghanistan. That was my one joke. There's Afghanistan issues, there's Iraq. I mean, there are all kinds of issues that we're all thinking about that are global. And so you need to have a global mindset. And the last thing I'll talk about is you mentioned kind of, climate change and nuclear proliferation. I mean, let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen. If there is a nuclear event, it is not going to be like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As bad as that was, and yes, I understand it helped end Hitler and Germany, and that needed to happen. But at the end of the day, one country, i.e. the United States, dropped not one, but 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Horrible. That would not be the case today. If North Korea launches one here, or we launch one there, it is not going to be geo-localized to the United States and North Korea. The whole world is going to be nuclear in a matter of minutes to hours. So absolutely, we need our children, all of us, but especially our children, to really think about and be exposed to international perspectives, global affairs, really understand and learn about other cultures. And if you can't travel there, and I know this is part of the conversation, have it embedded in our K through 12 and undergraduate educational landscape where people can be exposed to different cultures and countries.
Thank you. I hear often that science is an international language, or talking to people at Google, the coding it transcends linguistic barriers. Frederick, can you talk a little bit about your work internationally? And did it matter to have an understanding of the culture to be successful in what you were doing?
Absolutely. So I'll be real quick. I had kind of a bimodal distribution with international experience. My first set kind of was related to healthcare, and so I did a lot of vaccine work. And I lived for a year in the Sudan. I lived for another year in Haiti. And then my second set, probably a decade later, had to do with education. A lot of work in Senegal, a lot of work in Egypt, a lot of work in China, a lot of work in Germany. Again, all around STEM education. Real quick, the importance of learning the culture. I mean, the work we were doing in Haiti and the Sudan was related to USAID work, so it was funded by the US government. It was related to vaccine follow-up. And something that sounds so obvious to us today was really understanding the local cultural influences. We were trying to get moms to follow up on the vaccine status of their children, and we were using North American, United States, and Canadian mindsets and attractants and incentives to get the people to come. And we just absolutely blew it. Finally, after about a half a year, we figured out, well, let's ask the people what's culturally relevant. Let's let their equivalent block captains, their community leaders talk to us, and not us tell them, you know, oh, here's what you should think, but just shut up and listen and understand their culture, their influences. And it's amazing how, much like the rains we're hearing outside, the gates of heaven opened up and we had access to incredible retention and participation just by listening and letting them be the experts and us being the students.
Wow. Did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to mention that we work on the learning framework, which you saw. I'll have you hold it up again. Wow, that's cool. I'll speak a little louder here. I have some competition. For about 3 years, we're still working on it. It's a work in progress. Basically, it outlines what we believe is important for kids as far as, I brought him along for this, the attitude, skills, and knowledge of an explorer mindset. Okay, so, and we built it, behind all of that is all of our standards for K-12, for the obvious areas, you know, from science and social studies and next generation science standards, tech standards, core, common core, and then behavioral and, what am I trying to say, milestones for preschool, developmental milestones for preschool. So we did that, of course, based very, very much on the US system, right? And so we're working with partners in Mexico now, and we're talking about, they're very interested in the learning framework and in using our resources at National Geographic, because we have a ton of resources for teachers to use, online resources and others and publications. And we, from the very start, it was like, no, we cannot just translate this. We can't take this and put it into Spanish, because I don't know if what we talk about when we talk about empowerment as one of the attitudes, agency for students, if the ideas that we have behind that are appropriate, are culturally relevant. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. We don't know if it's culturally relevant. So we're in the process right now of taking a look at, because we have, this is what happens to a 7-year-old, and this is what responsibility looks like for a 9-year-old, and this is what responsibility looks like for a junior in high school, for example. It's not all in this one little brochure, but we do have it behind all of that. And so we know that we need to vet all that. We need to do some on the ground working with people, Mexican people who are working in education and people who are working with young children to make sure that it makes sense. In other words, we're very, very aware of the fact that we're not going to go into another country and say, here, you're going to like this. As much as we would like to. The other thing in the grant giving, we give grants to a lot of, and we're really trying to diversify this. I'll tell you up front, a lot of our traditional grantees have been white men from this country. A lot of them have. And so we're working very hard to diversify that. We're having a lot of success with that. But one of the very important things, if I'm going to go into Peru and work on an education project down there, I had better have everybody lined up in Peru who's going to be running the project down there. So it's just vitally important.
Thank you. And one of the questions touches on what you brought up. And please, if you have questions, fill it out and hold your hands up. And this one is, the U.S. is still way behind in having women in STEM fields. What are your thoughts about what to do in increasing the number of women in STEM fields, and providing some women role models in these fields is one thing that should be encouraged? Do either of you want to comment on that?
I'm a woman. I'm a woman, so I'll comment. Yeah, it's getting better, but it's not getting better fast enough. I still think the messaging, and it's micro-messaging. Have you ever heard that term? I just heard that term. Micro-messaging, which is sometimes subtle, maybe even not something people perceive, is still that STEM careers are for boys. And that has to change before there are going to be more women in STEM. The STEM careers need to be seen as careers that everyone can and should do. And I still think we're behind in that. And so I think that's important. I think that making it possible for women to have lifestyles that will allow them to work in STEM careers, or else change the job situations so that there's more flexibility. I think that's important for both men and women, by the way, but I do still think that that's a barrier. Do you have any?
Ditto.
Okay.
Ditto. Good. Are there any women here that consider themselves in the STEM field at any level? And if so, would you be willing to stand? Because everybody, Annalise says, everybody here. See how these people, yes, so stand. I just want to, here are some role models of women in STEM fields. And an honorary woman here as well who stood up. We appreciate your commitment. There's a couple of questions on relativity of educational scores across countries, so I'm going to kind of combine these two. But the U.S. has a relative low rating on the global scale, and have you experienced this in North American schools, either secondary or college? The related question is, can one of the panelists, or both, talk about key factors why some other countries are way ahead in STEM education, even in countries with hardly any government support? So, why are countries way ahead in STEM? And have you had any experience of that reflects the low rating in the US? And the first question goes to Frederick.
Great. So I alluded to this earlier when I said you've all heard the data on how US compares to international countries on these science and math tests. It's really important to look at the data and tease it apart. The main tests, there's two. There's one called the PISA exam, another one's called the NAEP. There are a bunch of them actually. But if you look at these tests where they look at American students in math and science versus Japanese, Chinese, Canadian, you name it, and they compare, and they say that, oh, America is 21 out of 35 countries tested in science, and 27 in math out of, and we're low. Ladies and gentlemen, when you tease apart the data, you have two sets of populations happening here. In this country, if you look at our elite prep schools or our top public schools, of which we have, not a ton, but we have some public schools that are phenomenal, and we have a lot of great private prep schools. Those kids are on par, if not better, than Japanese, Chinese, Finnish, you name it. The problem is our public school system overall is atrocious, and these tests don't discriminate, and so they take kids from a wide swath, and so you get all these crumbling public school children who aren't strong in math and who aren't strong in science, but they're taking these same tests, and when you aggregate the country versus country, we look bad. I'm stressing this because it's important to understand that in this very country, we have some of the best universities, from Ohio State to MIT and everything in between, right? We have phenomenal scientists and engineers, and we have great educational programs. But on a public scale, we suck. And that's the truth. And we need to spend more resources to raise the crumbling, much larger public school domain that's impacting those test scores. So I just want to say, as we hear those and we all echo them, we write them, we say them, our top kids in this country are neck and neck with the top kids around the world, and that's data driven.
Do you want to add anything, Elaine?
I'm not sure that.
No. Okay.
One of my concerns about what we're doing in STEM education has to do with teachers. There's a shortage of teachers who feel and probably are qualified in STEM subjects. and that is not saying anything bad about the teachers. I think that there's a lack of preparation in how to teach the STEM subjects. I think there's an expectation that they're going to fix the world, they're going to fix our public school system, and they can't do that alone. I am a teacher advocate. I work with a lot of teachers, and they come to us for content knowledge because you can't cover it all, you can't learn it all, and so they're feeling inadequately prepared, and in many ways they are. So yes, we have good universities for research. I think we have a ways to go in teacher preparation, and I think we need to keep those teachers, which is maybe the biggest problem that we have, is to keep those teachers who are teaching all disciplines. But I do know that one area that a lot of, and keep in mind, a lot of these folks are women who are feeling underprepared and feeling like they do not have the science, technology, engineering, math skills that they wish they had to be able to teach students. So they need our support.
Great, thank you. I'd mention too, since you talked about teachers in general, I mean, Finland's always at the top of these lists. And separate from the Singapore, the China, Korea, in Finland, the role of teacher has such an esteemed place in society. It's, lawyer, doctor, teacher, or the other way around. And so I think some of it is indeed the U.S. We have a place that teachers aren't placed upon that perhaps need to be. Please, more questions. This one, we have one with MIT in the title, and we have one with philosopher of science. So if you don't want to get to those questions, then you better submit one of yours. I'm just kidding. So MIT Media Lab abandoned the term, quote, multidisciplinary for, quote, antidisciplinary to highlight the sharing of ideas between disciplines without rigid divisions. What are your thoughts on this, particularly in organizing effective teams for complex problems with STEM underpinnings? Do either of you have a comment on or a thought on going from multidisciplinary to antidisciplinary?
Yeah, it's probably just semantics, but I think it's really one of the problems that we have as far as people being able I'll get on public schools again too, to be able to work in teams, because they're talking about accountability and they're talking about testing, and they don't have time sometimes to go into this sort of work. What it requires is a real problem-based approach. It requires what you see going on here in some situations. It requires people being able to work in teams on real-world problems and developing solutions. You cannot do that without working across disciplines. I kind of like across discipline instead of multidisciplinary. Anti-discipline sounds so, I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I like that term. That's pretty cool, but I'm not sure that it really says anything. Your opinion?
I couldn't agree. I just want to add, in the spirit of the MIT Media Lab, the reason why they came up with the term anti-discipline is not that they don't respect, certain specialty, but the fact of the matter today, it is really hard to be so narrow focused. I mean, you think about, everybody talks about big data. Matter of fact, that's kind of almost anti-vogue now. But the whole concept of big data means everything is integrated. I mean, if you're looking at where molecular biology is going, that wouldn't go anywhere without computer science. If you're looking at understanding how populations migrate, that wouldn't go anywhere without fusing geography with computer scientists. If you're looking at investment banking, right? Okay, studying the markets and stuff, well, there are a whole lot of mathematicians behind that. And on and on. Then you look at informatics, well, everything is connected to that. So it's just really, it's part tongue-in-cheek on their part, but they're really just making the point, hey, it's all about everything, and the more our students and adults, for that matter, can understand or at least approach things in a more holistic way, you can have a more powerful outcome. So, but I'm with you, man. If I was the 60s, I'd go with anti-disciplinary.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you. Let's take another look. What I'm thinking about now is this idea of you mentioned computer science. So, how many here have been impacted by hacking, or right? So whether it's
you all have, you just didn't know.
You didn't know it, yeah. We just hacked to when you get back you'll realize it. But no, but seriously, I mean, this is for real. It's economic, it's security, at U.S. elections, etc. And often these are from where? Or originating outside of our borders. And so I think about issues like that and other issues the World Economic Forum talks about that are global issues: climate change, poverty, gender parity, human trafficking. Like, can you talk a little bit more about why would a STEM person be effective in helping solve that? And why would a STEM person with global competence be even more effective? Frederica's looking ready. We got just a few minutes left, so if you have a question, send it up.
I mean, it just, for me, the whole STEM identity is just creating people who have the interest, capacity, and wherewithal to problem solve. It really comes down to that. You can want to be an artist or a pianist or a microbiologist. The whole STEM education or the STEAM education or the G-STEAM, I'm trying to give you a plug, it's really about just getting people to solve problems. And we have real problems. In fact, this country has a National Academy of Engineers, the country's greatest engineers, that came out with 14 grand challenges. These are grand challenges that if we can solve them, will make this country and the world a better place. Everything from solar energy to informatics, to better medicines, to you name it. One of them is cybersecurity. Right, and you just have to follow the election trends wherever you are on the map. Did Russia hack or not? As you pointed out, there is a lot of hacking that happens, and a lot of it comes from outside the borders of the United States. And these are real things that are happening. And so you want someone who can problem solve, and ideally, back to your connection with the global community, you want that person to be passionate or compassionate with nations outside of our borders. And so, you know, it's the best case scenario. If you have somebody that's well-rounded, that really does appreciate the earth as a unifying place and humanity as a group of people versus, you know, a group of holistic people versus individuals, and they want to problem solve, they're best empowered to make a positive difference in this place. So it's a no-brainer for me, but we have to work at it.
I know you want this back, but just a second. There's one thing that I wanted to add. We didn't talk about economics much, but there was something that I read when I was, and I did prepare for today, that I read that really intrigued me, and I want to look into it more. I think we've all heard the statistics about the fact that students that graduate in STEM fields are going to earn more money than their non-STEM graduates in a lifetime. That's sort of out there as, you know, a truth, a fact. But I also read that students who graduate in non-STEM careers will also have lifetime greater earnings whether they work in a STEM field or not. So I think there are several, with all the other variables being constant, of course. I think that's interesting because I think it says something about what students who are in STEM classes, in STEM programs in school, what they're getting is all of these other things that's a part of problem solving. It's these other things that are a part of what makes someone a good employee, what makes someone employable, what makes someone promotable. I mean, if they're not even in STEM careers, but about 12% higher was what I had read, and I don't remember statistics, but I remember this one. So I think that's kind of telling about how STEM is sort of, and can be, if done right, anti-disciplinary and also global.
The last question I wanted to ask you, and I'm glad you turned to the economy and employers, is what are employees asking for? Like, we have educators in the room at K-12, higher ed. We also have employers in the room. Whether it relates to STEM or global, just what are you hearing in your interactions with companies, either now or in the past?
Very quick example.
Speed
Back
round.
in the 80s, I worked for the Red Rocks Community College in Golden, Colorado. And my job was to go out and interview the employers. And these are primarily tech and vocational types of careers we were training people for. And I was supposed to go out and find out, okay, now what do you need in these people who were graduating? And across the board, you know what I heard. What I heard was we need people who care about their work, who show up on time, who can work with others, who can problem solve, who can think on their feet, who care about what they're doing. We can teach them the other stuff. I don't think it's changed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last year I had the pleasure of doing what they call a study tour. We went to IDEO, Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. And what's fascinating is they've taken that point that you made to the next level. I mean, when you apply for these jobs, they have a massive kind of weeding process. But once they bring you in, the interview is anywhere from an hour to a 5-hour session of they throw a bunch of problems at you and they ask you to solve them. And then they throw in a bunch of other people you don't know in a room and they ask you to interact with them. There's no conventional interviewing or looking at your resume anymore. They want to see, can you speak the King's English? Can you communicate? Are you culturally sensitive? Can you problem solve? Can you think fast on your feet? Are you compassionate? And are you willing to work with people? And it's a whole new model. They don't care what schools you went to. They don't care what grades you got. Matter of fact, you go look at Google. Of course, you got people who went to top schools to get there, but you have this whole subset of people that have failed out of college or went to college but were D students, went to some, what they call or consider third or fourth grade colleges, but in action setting, they can problem solve, they are creative, which gets back to the art and the humanities. Creativity is not a science thing, creativity is an inspirational thing. And so it's a great question when you talk about this great PASS program and what you see behind these glass windows. I mean, these are people who are learning to work collaboratively and solve problems. And it's not about your GPA or your SAT score or your whatever else the score. So absolutely.
Thank you all. Thank you especially to our panelists, Elaine Larson and Frederick Bertley, for talking to us about the importance of STEAM and STEM and global. I'd encourage you to take the time to take a tour, either formal or informal, with the PASS Foundation. Wait in the back, and you'll get to see young people flexing their minds to change the world, whether it's right here in Columbus or it's in Cairo. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to encourage you to join us on October 18th when we talk about U.S. security. Please fill out the membership form, and we are adjourned. Thank you.